This episode of Film Stock Reviews, I'm reviewing episode 5, chapter 5 of Pachinko. Now, Sunya and Isak are in Osaka in 1931, and it's the hustle and bustle of Japan, you know. They just arrive and they don't know what to do, and Sunya meets Isak's brother, Yoseb, and it's kind of interesting because we're getting introduced to such a character now in chapter 5, episode 5, and he's not exactly excited to see them because he thinks Sunya has wrong intentions with Isak. And it's really interesting because when Sunya is there, she feels like she's an outsider, and especially as Korean speaking at this time in Japan in the 1930s is frowned upon, and you're more seen as an outsider. And Sunya just sits there while these two brothers talk, and it's a back and forth, and you can see that, you know, Isak's brother doesn't want either of them there. It's really interesting. And there we find that Sunya meets Kyung-hee for the first time. Now, Kyung-hee is really big part of Sunya's life in this story. The problem is that this show is not in linear order like the novel is. The novel is in order, but this show jumps around and takes different excerpts and parts and mixes it in together in this thrilling emotional aspect that we call a television show. Now, Kyung-hee is very, very kind to Sunya, something that Sunya didn't expect at all, and you see that in the emotion in her face because she's an outsider. She didn't know what to expect when coming to Japan. The outsider is so interesting because it's Japan. You wouldn't think there would be that much racism toward Koreans, but there is, and it's actually insane to see, especially how a show like this picks up on it. At the same time, Soo-young speaks to Isak, who promises to be by her side no matter what happens. Yeah, of course. Okay, I'm pretty sure I'm going to buy that as I'm watching this show. Now, as they worry along with each other, they're trying to figure out that they're both outsiders, they end up making love. It's an interesting scene, something we didn't expect to happen, but it did happen. I feel like it wasn't needed so soon in chapter 5, episode 5, especially so early on in these episodes. Maybe if you did it between episode 7 or the season finale, episode 8, it would have made sense, but not so soon between these two characters. It kind of felt rushed and forced in a way because they just got there and, you know, they're just, you know, sleeping together all of a sudden. Now, it's interesting because a month passes and the pregnancy that Sunya is going through is advancing. We can see that she's sleeping more, she's more tired, she can't do the chores that she's supposed to do. This is why Kyung-hee is doing it all for her. And it's interesting because as Kyung-hee's doing the washing, she smells the clothes. It reminds her of Korea, the homeland back home, but she's here in Japan, which is really an interesting scene. Now, here is an interesting part. The family is actually in debt for 160 yen to loan sharks, whom Yoseb actually borrowed to bring over his brother and Sunya. Well, of course, unfortunately, the debt has doubled due to interest, and Sunya says to them, "Don't worry, I'll fix it because it's my fault." Listen, I don't understand what her problem is. I really don't. The way her character is done is really interesting. She is an outsider, but she wants to do things on her own, but she can't. Now she heads down to the pawn shop, pawnbroker, whatever you want to call it, back in those days, and she manages to sell this watch, this gold watch, for 300 yen, and then Kyung-hee joins her, and then, you know, they're happy about this and all that. All of a sudden, Ko Han-soo, Ko Han-soo heads back to the pawn shop, buys back the watch, and, you know, basically says, pointing out that Sunya married a dreamer, and for all that, she'll pay dearly for what she's done. So forth. I guess Ko Han-soo's jealous now, which he shouldn't be. So that was the first part of episode 5. Now the later half is back in the 1980s, where we find that Sunya walks through the fish market when she's back home, and, you know, it's interesting. She's just looking at the sights, and at the same time, Solomon makes it back to Tokyo, where he meets an old friend from school, and basically his little hotel thing that he did is making the rounds and word of mouth and of what's happening and what's not happening. Now with that, Mr. Andrews, if you know Mr. Andrews, who that character is, which for me is really annoying, he's having issues with his so-called financial agreements and stuff. But that would unfortunately be bad for Solomon, because that would bear the burden on him, and I'm pretty sure Mr. Andrews did this on purpose, if that's my opinion. Now, while Solomon's doing his thing and his own journey, trying to figure out and meeting up with friends and, you know, trying to figure out certain things of what happened in the past with the father and the grandfather, Sunya shows up and tries to find her own details of where her husband is buried, and basically a worker so far where she finds it as, she classifies Sunya as one of those, meaning Koreans who came across to Japan. It's really emotional aspect of this show, and like I said before, the racism in this show is insane and really stupid for that matter. It seems like a lost cause until she finds a file that appears to be linked to a relocation request, meaning there's also a name too, and this name is somewhat reminiscent of what she has when she went through with her past. You can see that she knows this name when you look at her face, but she doesn't really give off that emotion. But you can tell she knows who this person is. Now, I don't want to give away who this person is. You have to watch the episode to find out who it is. And basically, this person and this pair have a really, really emotional reunion. And another interesting aspect is the editing aspect with the young Sunya, the older Sunya. I love that part of it and the aspect of this show, because it makes it that much more close to home and that much more emotional in it. Now, the thing I did like about this episode is that we saw that Sunya is struggling in both her younger years and now her older years as well, trying to figure out things, and she's still going through the racism and all that, even though it's been 50, 60 years between these time periods. And I mean, the book, I want to say so far, is much better than what this show is putting out, because the book, like I said in this episode review earlier, the book is very, very cohesive. It follows a certain way, the beginning, the middle, and end. I feel like certain aspects of this show take from the book and they just put it in there to mix things up, to make it more drama and more of a crazy, dramatic moments for here and there. But listen, I really do love this show, and it's very emotional because, like I said before in my previous reviews of this show, not much is talked about the Koreans going into Japan and facing this kind of racism, and where the Koreans are shunned upon. And it's still kind of going on in today's world, but it's not talked about as much. But it does need to be talked about, because you think that all these Asians look alike. No, they don't. It's very different. The Japanese, the Koreans, the certain aspects of certain races of Asian are very, very much different in what you categorize them in. And I feel like this show is touching on that in a subtle way, but more so in a way where it's putting forth that race issue, not like the book did. The book touched on it, but not as much. So let me know what you thought about episode 5, chapter 5 of Pachinko. Did you like it? Did you not like it? What did you think of it? Where in this time period do you like better? Do you like the early days of Sunya, or do you like the older version of her that is storytelling in the 1980s? And like I said, the 1930s or the 1980s? Which story of hers do you like better? Which is more emotional, which is less emotional? And where do you see the story going? And I mean, it's very different from the books. If you've read the books and you're watching this show, let me know in the comment section below what you think you see is different and what you think is not. And what do you think will happen in the next 3 episodes that are left, because this is episode 5, and then 6, 7, and 8 are the final 3 episodes. I'm curious to see what happens, how it closes out, if it stays true to the book. It's going to be interesting for sure. So let me know in the comment section below about the questions I just asked, and I'll see you guys in the next review video. And be sure you tune in next week for my episode 6, chapter 6 review of Pachinko.